For whatever reason.
For whatever reason.
For, whatever reason.
So what brings us here today?
Bread.
Bread?
Bread for Easter dinner.
Is this going to be the famous no-knead bread we keep talking about?
It will be.
Except this one's maybe a slightly different variation. We're doing some new stuff now.
Well, this is the variation of the Cook's Illustrated version of almost no-knead bread.
Great. So what's the first thing we need to do?
First thing we're going to do is measure out 3 cups or 15 ounces of flour. This is my all-purpose flour.
Okay.
So, what I have here is a postage or I use it for a kitchen scale, with my bowl on top of it, and I am going to zero it out with the bowl on top so that as I add the flour in, I'll get the net weight or the tare weight of just the flour.
What would people do if they didn't have the scale?
They could go with 3 cups. I just like to be a little more precise in my bread baking. So this is yeast. Since I bake bread so much, I buy it a pound at a time and I keep it in a jar in the refrigerator. I need a 1/4 teaspoon. So 1/4 teaspoon yeast right now. And next is 1½ teaspoons of salt. So this is plain table salt. 1 teaspoon. 1/2 teaspoon. Now that all the dry ingredients are in the bowl, I'm just going to mix them up, get the yeast and the salt incorporated into the flour, and then we'll move on to measuring our wet ingredients.
My favorite part, the beer. Now, from what I understand, well, first of all, we're going to use Yingling.
Right.
And from what I understand, the recipe calls for
3 ounces of a mild flavored lager. We tend to like about 5 ounces. We need a total of 10 ounces of liquid. The recipe calls 3 ounces of beer, 7 ounces of water. I'm actually going to do 5 and 5.
Now, just to be clear, the beer is not necessarily there for flavor, it is there for yeast.
Well, yeast flavor, so
yeah.
Technically, yes.
Well, it introduces yeasts other than the
Right.
yeast that you're using for the bread.
So here's my favorite feature of this bread recipe. This can, still half full. I get beer out of this now. It's much like the beer can chicken. You have to reserve half the beer for yourself.
Not really sure if you can see, but essentially we have beer and water at 10 ounces. Now, we also
Have one more ingredient.
happen to check it over here, but that's just the way we are. You don't need to, you can just measure it by size.
Right. I also need 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. So I have my tablespoon measure.
What's the white vinegar good for? Or what's it do?
I don't remember.
I think it adds a little something to the flavor, and there's some chemical property that it's helping with on the bread here.
Yeah, I really don't remember. So 1 tablespoon right into the liquid. Now it's time to mix the wet beer, water, vinegar with the dry flour, salt, yeast. And what I'm going to do is pour it all in and just use a rubber spatula to fold it together, incorporate it until all of the flour is wet. This might take a few minutes, and the recipes all describe it as being a shaggy ball of dough.
I believe that qualifies as a shaggy ball of dough.
That looks shaggy and Scooby to me.
So what do we do now?
Now we cover this with saran wrap, and we're going to let it sit 8 to 18 hours, and then we'll bake it tomorrow.
Excellent. So it's now the next morning, and the ball of dough has roughly doubled in size. If we come back here, you'll see that the yeast has done its job. We've got a nice ball o' gas in there. So, what is it we're going to do now?
Now we are going to roll the dough out of the bowl. We're going to knead it just a little bit. We're going to form it into a loaf, and then we're going to let it sit out to rise for an additional 2 hours.
So this would be why it is almost no-knead bread.
I'm going to remove the plastic, release the gas. Woo, and it smells yeasty. This is all-purpose flour. I'm going to spread some on my work surface. I'm using a Silpat mat just because it reduces sticking. This is a very sticky dough. Pull it out of the bowl and roll it. I'm going to put some flour on top. And we're going to do some kneading. Anytime it's sticky, I just add a little bit more flour. "10 to 15 kneads." I'm not actually counting, I just know that's about how many it takes, until it becomes a much more cohesive ball, which you can see it is, as opposed to what we had when I rolled it out of the bowl. So then comes the shaping. If you want to shape it into a ball, you push. I'm pulling dough from the top and pushing it into the center on the bottom. If you want it into a longer loaf type shape, you just have to use your hands and work with it and shape it into whatever shape makes you happy.
Now, one more note here. While this is rising, Nanette has covered it with saran wrap to help keep the moisture in, keep it from drying out. But you'll see how flat this loaf is right now, and when we come back after the rise, it should be larger. So it's been about an hour and a half, and the loaf got wider rather than taller, but it should get taller in the oven, we hope. So what is the next step?
Next thing I'm going to do is just sprinkle a little bit of flour across the top.
Okay.
It gives it sort of that rustic look whenever you buy a loaf of rustic bread in the grocery store or in the bakery. That's what gives that. So then I'm going to take a very sharp knife. I'm just going to do some cuts, because as the bread rises in the oven, if you do the cuts, it will actually open up there instead of the crust splitting.
So there's our oven at 450 degrees, ready for the bread. And Nanette has the pizza stone in the oven, ready.
There's also a broiler pan down at the bottom. I don't have elements on the top and bottom of my oven, so I can have the broiler pan down there. I'm going to put the bread with the parchment there. Then I have 1 cup of hot water that I'm going to pour into the broiler pan. And it's going to make steam, which will help form the crust on the bread.
It has been about a half an hour.
Correct.
So let's take a look. Well, looky there. We've got bread.
It looks bready.
Get out of your way a little bit.
So the easiest way I found, since it's on the baking stone and it's on the parchment, I just grab the parchment with some tongs and pull it out onto my pizza peel. And then there's a beautiful loaf of bread.
For whatever reason,
For whatever reason.
For, whatever reason.
For whatever reason.
For whatever reason. For whatever reason.
Whatever. For whatever reason.